Welcome to the Derek Diamond Experience podcast, where every week I take a look into the world of film and television with those who have lived it and experienced it. I am your host, Derek Diamond, and joining me on today's show is artist and the director of the film Two Ways to Go West, Mr. Ryan Brookhart. How are you, sir?
Hello, Derek. How are you?
Doing good, and we were actually having a really nice chat here, mostly comparing weather to where we're respectively living, you out in California and me in Florida. And it's funny because on my show last week, I was talking about kind of the same thing, is we're in the dead heat of summer right now, no pun intended, because I can walk out to my mailbox, and when I walk back in my house, I'm already drenched in sweat. It's ridiculous right now.
Oh, I mean, humidity is like a food group when it comes to like the South and the Midwest. We talk about it forever.
And we were actually talking about it because you grew up in Ohio, correct?
I did. I grew up in a place called Centerville, Ohio.
And what was it like growing up in Ohio? I've never personally been to that portion of the country. So what was it like for you growing up in Ohio? And was film, because I do definitely want to talk about your art career, but was art and film something that you were interested in an early age?
It's a great question. It's actually the first time someone's asked me that question as it relates to where I grew up. And that does play a significant part of my creative development. And it's something I didn't even think about when I was, younger, relatively younger, because we don't tend to think about those things. We've got to get a little arc in our life to look back on it, right? And so yeah, I grew up in the Midwest. I grew up in a place called Ohio, and I have a real connection to that particular place because my grandfather was the first mayor of that town. So I, really steeped in the history of it. And Ohio was, I think, like a lot of places growing up in like the 70s and 80s. It was that wasn't, let's say, the East Coast or the West Coast. In that, we were like a flyby states to some people. And we'd go to the movies and we'd see, things like Raiders of the Lost Ark or Gremlins or Explorers. Or for me, my taste went to the really esoteric as well. And so, film was kind of this always expanding language because I became much, much more interested in it as I got older. I started going, well, gee, what else can I watch? And I discovered like the 400 Blows on PBS and things like that. So I was a strange kid that way. But I think that for me, knowing relatively early in my life that I was not going to be a lawyer, that I was not going to be a doctor, that I wasn't a jock, but I did have these artistic inclinations, which is not a euphemism, by the way, but which probably you could actually read into it with me. But I was always drawing. I was always writing. I was always writing scripts. I didn't even know they were scripts, frankly. I'd never seen a script, but I would write the name of a character and then his dialogue or her dialogue, and then I'd write the other dialogue. I'll tell you a funny thing. I don't think I've ever talked about this on any of the interviews, but when I was relatively young, I would collect soundtracks on vinyl. So it was like Alien and Empire Strikes Back, all those things. And, Jerry Goldsmith and James Horner and John Williams were like my rock stars. And I would collect this music and I would, watch these films, and then I would rewrite the movies. And then I would record the dialogue with multiple tapes so I could actually respond to myself in real time and change the pitch and whatever. And I would add the music and sound effects or whatever. And I did this for a number of years. I had no idea that what I was doing was essentially like a radio drama or a movie without the visual end of it. And so I was doing that at a very young age. And again, I had no idea what what I was really doing. I had such a creative impulse. I also was doing a lot of illustration, and my teacher said, "My gosh, you're drawing constantly. Would you like to draw illustrate, say, the Christmas card this year for this thing or that thing?" And by the time I got into junior high, I was steeped in theater and you name it. By the time I got into high school, I actually went to a private school. I I was running the school newspaper. I was working on, I was basically like an unpaid member of the staff. Um, and all of these things, and this is kind of a very wonky way of answering your question, I guess. All of these things were obviously creative outlets for me. And I didn't have any one particular direction I wanted to take it in, but I knew that those were the places where I felt comfortable and I could also feel uncomfortable, but wanting to excel. Probably the way, like, say, a jock would go to he's playing football saying, well, I didn't make that pass, but I'll try it again. I didn't want to make the pass in football, but I kept wanting to push myself further and further and further in my creative endeavors. And every time I found a new one, I wanted to try that one as well. And I think the logical conclusion of that for me was film, even though it wasn't on my radar as such. I was doing a lot of writing, a lot of drawing. Um, in my early 20s, I actually became an editor in chief of a pretty big art magazine. And I was easily the youngest person on the staff. And I really enjoyed it. And by the way, Derek, I mean, I got to meet some of my idols. I got to become friends with Roddy McDowall. He was a shutterbug. He loved taking photographs, and my magazine had a lot of photographs in it. And I mean, gosh, interviewed Oliver Stone, and John Schlesinger became a buddy for a while, and he did Marathon Man, Midnight Cowboy, things like that. And he was actually I interviewed him in the magazine, and I got to talk to them about this. And they would always say, well, you should probably make movies. It seems like that's what you want to do. And I, hearing that from people that I idolize made me really second and third guess that.
That's got to be an ultimate form of reassurance.
Well, it is and it isn't, because then you start asking yourself, as a creative person, am I just a fraud? What if I do it and I fail? Right? And this is sort of psychotherapy. I'm sure there's a few people going, oh yeah, I get that. I mean, you do something, and it's an interesting sort of critic, fanboy, and fangirl class, as I'm sure you're very familiar with, which is, people that are happy or comfortable criticizing or critiquing everybody else, but they don't dare do it themselves, because then they're exposing themselves as maybe not being as perfect as they demand everything else be. It's like there's this all or nothing idea that it's the worst film ever or it's the best film ever. Or, I came to a place relatively early when I realized that anytime someone says that film sucked, top to bottom, just sucked, I started realizing that is a nonsense statement, because no one makes a movie to suck. And there's a lot of great creative, artistic things going on in any movie. You probably could pick out a few and say, well, yeah, Ryan, but what about that one? And that's, look, there's always going to be an exception to the rule, but even films that I can't stand, and I won't mention any, but like big, crazy summer blockbusters, and I like a lot of those too. But some of them, I'm going, this is torture, really, for me to watch this. And yet I would never walk out saying the film is just crap, because I know there's a ton of artistic expression in that. I know there are a ton of artists doing their best work in there, and it's frustrating, I'm sure, for them too, because they're going, wow, we can't even linger on a single shot for 2 seconds. So all that work I put in is now just edited out practically. So I tend to be very careful with my assessment about other people's creative endeavors. But yeah, I mean, I would hear people that I really respect and say, you should go try it. And I felt like, well, yeah, that's maybe a compliment, but if I did it, it would probably suck. Some people probably think what I do sucks anyway. But, at the end, you realize it has nothing to do with anybody else's opinion. If you're authentically on your journey, you're doing it. I'm not trying to sound like a guru, but if you are genuinely in the process of doing it, it feels right. It feels good. And I always liken it to going back to that moment when you're a child and you remember a summer day lasted forever because you were absolutely engaged in your own imagination and time. All the peripheral stuff that we get clogged up with in our adult lives just is not there as a child. And the sort of boundless level of creativity and the optimism that comes with that, and the creative ingenuity, and all those things which are so steeped in childhood. We have those as adults too, but we sort of bury them with all this peripheral crap. The issues of worrying about what people are thinking about us, or, well, maybe it won't measure up to my own expectations. Those things, when you're literally in the process of doing something creatively, authentically, those considerations fall away, and that's the best time, you know.
Absolutely. I did want to backtrack a bit. The story you mentioned about recording your own dialogue and writing
Yeah.
out character lines, that's one of the greatest stories I've ever heard on this
Oh,
entire podcast. No, that's so cool to imagine that you would go to that length to create something. But I mean, that's in a way how people do it, especially at an early age. And finding that outlet, I mean, I can absolutely relate to that because growing up, I grew up in a small town where sports were pretty much everything. I had no
right.
desire to play sports, and I didn't know that film was anything I wanted to pursue until I was in college. But it was one of those things that doing plays and coming up with stories. I used to draw little comic sketches when I was in elementary and middle school. I mean, artistic talent was something that I learned very early that I do not have, but I would still try it. But nothing near like what you do. But it's still like telling little stories that way, and then taking production classes in college and learning that having that outlet, and even just making silly movies with your friends, which I've done quite a few of those. But it's one of those things that you want to do it when you do it. Like I was mentioning this on my show last week as well, that the filmmaking and the production side of things, it's something that you have to love to do just because of the sheer amount of time that it takes to get everything done. Because everyone
Oh, yeah.
from the director all the way down to the PA works very hard. And you mentioned, no one's out to make a bad movie.
Right.
And sometimes they just don't turn out that great. But that you can say that about really any type of project. Sometimes it just does not work out the way you expect, but no one sets out to make a terrible movie. And everyone works hard on it.
Exactly. And I've been on enough movie sets in my life to, and I think anybody who is let's say a critic, and God knows, we now know there are way too many people critiquing uh, any kind of artistic expression, um, to the point that it seems almost redundant. I mean, give me some level of qualification why you're saying what you're saying, right? There was actually an interesting quote I read by Oliver Stone about Pauline Kael. And if you remind me, I will tell you what that is. I'll have to look it up in a second. But yeah, I was thinking about this the other day. It's like, you can buy the best ingredients for some, like, say, dessert you're going to make. And everything is like the most expensive, the best ingredients. You could put it together, and one thing you might screw up, or one thing might not come out just the way you want it. And yeah, the end result could be something that didn't ultimately turn out the way you wanted it to. It's like, well, it doesn't taste quite the way I expected it to. I think always, you know, a great, great, great film is some level of a happy accident. I mean, a perfect film. Some films become really, really great with some time because they actually fall into a place, a zeitgeist in our culture that actually just hits at that right moment. Some films, because they, especially, and I'm talking about a very specific period now, some films, like say in the 70s, 60s, 70s, where that was that great auteur moment where you actually had someone say, this is my vision, my specific vision. Yeah, those are some great films because everything sort of like stood or fell on the backs of people like, Bill Friedkin and, Michael Cimino, things like that. But those are, those times pretty much are gone unless you're making really independent cinema.
No, that's very true. And you bring up a great point that usually those who do critique don't do it themselves because I don't think some critics quite understand the level of work that goes into it. So, I mean, I'll use myself as an example. I have a normal 9 to 5 job,
Mhm.
but then I have, whatever film project I'm working on. That's almost like a second job because you come home, you might, make something quick for dinner, and then you just get to writing, or you put out casting calls, you watch audition videos, try and get a crew together.
Yeah.
It honestly is. It's like a second job. People don't realize the amount of time and effort that goes into it. So I totally agree with you there. I did want to talk with you about your artwork and your art design specifically in the film industry, because
Sure.
growing up, I loved movie posters. And I still think they're extremely important, because when you go to a theater, and it's unfortunate that we're not going to theaters now, because as far as like what you would consider like a daily activity or something that you could go out and do, that's the thing I miss the most, is going
Oh,
to a
me
movie
too.
to a movie theater, and you seeing like the huge display of posters that are outside or that go through the hallways. I'll always, whenever I'm done with a movie, I'll walk the halls of the theater to look at the posters, because as a kid, I remember growing up, I was a huge Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles fan. And when the first live action movie came out, they had the four turtles coming out of the manhole cover, and
Hmm.
that alone sold it to me. So,
Right.
how did you get into doing artwork in the film industry?
Well, again, that's a terrific question. And it also takes me back to my childhood. Something else I did as a kid, and I had forgotten I had done, was I had a giant set of scrapbooks where I would actually, on Sundays especially, this goes back many years now, because I'm hella old. I mean, not super old, but I'm old. And I would, on Sundays, they would sometimes print like four color giant fold out posters for movies. And I cut them out and I saved them. And I had literally scrapbooks full of movie posters. I was obsessed with movie posters. Not even, again, not, someone reminded me of that, a childhood friend. And I said, wow, you're right. I remember doing that. So I guess there was always that really cool, like you put it, when you saw the turtles coming out of the manhole cover. And what we saw, I remember that teaser poster. You're seeing something that's actually, oh my gosh, those aren't cartoons. Those are like real Ninja
Mm-hmm.
Turtles coming out of a real manhole cover. And I can practically see them. My gosh, I've got to go see that movie. Um, that's the way I felt about movie posters myself. So I've been doing a lot of writing. I became the editor in chief of an art magazine, and I was working a lot with uh, the aesthetic of the magazine. It was like it was a very expensive, perfect bound. So like that looks like a book. In other words, so I had a spine, uh, expensive looking publication, and I spent so much time in the design part of our company watching these guys put stuff together with Photoshop. And this was early Photoshop. And they also used a software called Quark, which was like this sort of, now it's sort of very rudimentary. I don't think Quark exists, but you do your work in Photoshop, then you drop it into this layout program. So archaic. But I was amazed at like the level of artistic expression you could get away with computers. And I said, I've got to learn that. I've got to learn that. That to me was the missing part of my creative side in terms of drawing and illustrate. I didn't want to illustrate anymore. And I still wanted to write, but that that was like almost alchemy, watching people work in Photoshop. So I decided that I would teach myself Photoshop. I had a friend who was just an amazing guy. His name is Brad Parker, and Brad is a terrific illustrator in his own right. Now he designs things for Body Glove, and he's amazing. But when that magazine ended, I started another magazine, and it was called Go Figure. It was a toy action figure entertainment magazine. And at that point, I decided that I was going to, really put my neck on the block and start doing some of the illustrations. Most of them were being done by Brad, who was doing like these amazing composite shots of taking photographs of the toys and then making them look really photorealistic in these really photorealistic backgrounds. Nobody was doing that at the time. Nobody was. Now everyone does it. But we were definitely the first doing that sort of thing. And I needed to understand how that could be done. I was just blown away by it. And so Brad gave me a lot of lessons, and I, bought a better and a better computer. And when Go Figure ended after about 2 years, right around that time, a company called Full Moon Entertainment, Charlie Band, Puppet Master, I'm sure you know of them.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, he reached out to me because we had done a number of things with Full Moon, and said, "Hey, I'm looking for an art director. Are you interested in the job?" And I played it really cool, saying, "Oh, I'd be interested." Desperate for a job, right? Because the magazine ended, and I went in, and that started a relationship with Full Moon, and I started designing toy packaging for them and movie posters and things like that. And that lasted for a while. And but to this day, actually, I have a relationship with Full Moon and Charlie. But that specific part of my career, that's what jump started that. And being part of Full Moon was a huge benefit because they really ruled the video aisles for a long time.
Right.
So I got to a lot of my stuff, really got a lot of exposure from that. Uh, I was getting better and better. What I was doing, I was more confident, and so I ended up working with a lot of companies from Discovery to Image Entertainment to, I mean, you name it. I was doing a lot of stuff, and to this day, that is sort of what I would call my day job. But I tell people all the time, it's a job that I would do even if I wasn't paid for it. I love design work. I don't even understand precisely what the terminology would be anymore because there's such a weird kind of like collage of disciplines that you can apply to it, from illustration to design to color theory, all that stuff. And I love it. In fact, right now I'm actually applying a lot of those ideas to and I can't think of the name of the program right now. It's the graduation for Maya, whatever it is. But I'm doing it for a sequel to a movie called Trace that I directed a few years ago. So that's how I got into it. And I'm, like I said, I'm still doing it. I designed the art for Two Ways to Go West, as a matter of fact.
Have you been doing a lot of design work still, despite the fact that everything's shut down for the most part due to COVID?
Well, it's interesting because there's actually more work now, and that's basically because uh, there's so much content that's needed. We're essentially streaming everything now. You can't go to movies, and so anyone who has a digital streaming service or has content that they want to get out there and they want it to be picked up by one of the distributors, one of the digital distributors, they need artwork, they need a campaign. And so yeah, I mean, I will say that I'm actually doing more work now.
That is interesting to think about because there are certain jobs that are still going, or can be even busier.
Yeah.
I've used this comparison a couple of times. Throughout people that I've talked to, especially out in California, because similar to, I mean, I feel like California is one of the biggest states as far as shutting everything down goes, as far as just like the sheer amount of stuff. But
Oh yeah, for sure.
those who write or do jobs like, say, edit video, or in your case do artwork, you can still do that from your home because you can just, all you need
Right.
is a computer and the software to be able to do it. So I expect and actually predict that once COVID is over and we get back to whatever the new normal is going to be, because we were also talking about this earlier, that we neither of us think that things will be 100% back to the way they were before. But
No, for sure.
but I also think that there's going to be this huge surge of creativity and content creating, because everyone who's a screenwriter can still write at home. And then once productions start back up again and people can go out and make indie films like that were going on before, I think we're going to see a huge surge of that. And I personally can't wait for it.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Look, I mean, digital cinema, or whatever you want to call it, long form storytelling, even short form storytelling from a filmic standpoint of view, has become highly democratized because of it's so inexpensive to actually do it if you want to do it. And obviously, there's an enormous amount of work behind it, but you can shoot a 4K feature on your phone.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not a question of not having the tools to do it. It's a question of having the motivation to actually come up with a story, putting all the work behind the scenes and actually doing the work. But because of that, I believe we have a tremendous opportunity to do a lot of great stuff. I mean, there's going to be a lot of not great stuff too, but I think that it is a tremendous opportunity. And yeah, to your point specifically, look, I've been working out of my own home office for years. Uh, the idea of having an art department, an actual existing art department in a studio, I think that went away years ago. I think one of the last ones, if I'm not mistaken, was on the Paramount lot, and that ended right after a specific film. There was everything was being outsourced, and I feel you know it's a very strange thing because definitely all the designers I know, we're making a lot less money than we did when we had studio projects on a regular basis. Now there are so many things out there, and the price has gotten lower. In part because the perception is, well, if it's not being printed, uh, then it shouldn't cost as much, which is up totally ridiculous because it's still the same material, if not more material. Every piece of art you do, you're doing multiple versions of that piece of art, and that doesn't include all the different comps, versions you're doing. So it's it's got to be something you love to do. B, you've got to have a real hunger to make it really, really good. And C, there is a tremendous opportunity for this kind of work, whatever the work is in terms of making films, making content, because we're going to need more and more and more of it. And like you said, dude, I mean, we're never going to go back to the way things were. I I truly believe that the cinema experience will return. I believe the theater experience will return, but it will not be the same experience. And I think it's going to be a slow road back to some degree of what we remembered, but not, again, not the way we remembered as kids. It will never be that freewheeling. I just don't think it will be.
Well, I can also see I think big cinemas like AMC and Regal, I think they will still be around for the most part, but I also think we could have the opportunity to see a lot more smaller, more locally owned theaters that show like your indie films. Like I'll use The Lighthouse as an example.
Right.
One of the A23 films that came out along with like that and Uncut Gems, more independent based things.
Sure.
I can see a possibility where we see more of those pop up, and you'll still have your big cinematic experiences like the Marvel movies and things like that, but I don't think we'll see as much of them, because I've even read that future Star Wars productions could have a smaller, more intimate feel due to COVID.
Yeah, and look how successful Mandalorian is. I
Oh
mean, it's a terrific
man.
show to begin with, but it's in a way it's absolutely perfect for this kind of experience. You get these 30-minute great stories that I don't know. I can't say enough great things about Mandalorian, but something I'm sure you've seen too. Not only are a lot of say big films, big tentpole films especially, being pushed back to next year, but those few cinemas that are actually showing things like in England and various other countries, they're showing it's like a revival theater. Empire Strikes Back, Jaws, Ghostbusters, and these films in very, very limited windows of distribution are doing incredibly well. That's something else I think we're going to see more of is, just because we have it on DVD or digital format or whatever, people still yearn to have that big cinematic experience. I just don't think anything can replace that. And so it's going to be specialized, but it'll still be there. It's just going to be there, like you say, in a more, I don't know, rarefied place. I'd love to see some old movie theaters, come back and have, limited runs. Something like The Lighthouse is perfect for a theater. And then maybe a week shows, I don't know, the Indiana Jones films or whatever. That would be terrific. And I'd go pay money for that.
Man, I would love to see Empire Strikes Back and Jaws in a movie theater. That would be absolutely
I
amazing.
Yeah, I never got to see Jaws in a movie theater. That drives me crazy. But there you are.
Oh, you never know. I mean, hopefully, once theaters slowly start to open back up, we will get the opportunity to do that. But
Absolutely.
speaking of movies, you recently directed a film called Two Ways to Go West, which I
Yes.
believe is now available for streaming. Is that correct?
It is. It is. You can watch it uncut, but with some commercials, free on Tubi, which is I just actually watched it the other day on Tubi, and it looks great. On that, in fact, the way they cut it up, we have these sort of chapter breaks of a sort in the movie that are built into the film. But Tubi found a way to kind of integrate those into the way they present the movie, so it's kind of cool. It's on Amazon. I believe next week it'll be on iTunes, Roku. It's basically most all of the major digital platforms. Amazon for sure. Yeah.
So, what was it that drew you to want to direct this, and how are you approached to do it?
Well, I'll kind of tell the story slightly backwards. The script that I read, I thought it spoke a very specific place that I was going through at the time, feelings of betrayal and confusion with friends. And I thought the script nailed that kind of experience without, right on its nose. It wasn't like telegraphing a specific event or this or that. It just had this feeling of, wow, I know what these guys are going through. And they're just three guys who are not the most articulate people. And, they're smart fellows, but they're not, speaking to this specific event or that specific event. They're all just going through their own sort of, emotional maturity because they're in their like late 20s and they're about to get married. And I don't know, I was reading that and I thought, gosh, this really feels authentic. I had read it in part because a friend of mine wrote the screenplay and he said, hey, would you just give me some notes? I'd love to know what you think about it. And so I read it and I said, gosh, I mean, I can say that maybe this could be expanded or that could be expanded, but if you're asking me what I think about the story and the script as it is, I think it's just great. And we ended up having a few additional conversations just about theme and about how one would approach directing something like that. Because it does read very much like a stage play. It's got kind of that Sam Shepard-y, three men escalating their intensity in terms of what they think about certain things, but not necessarily getting angry at the specific event, sort of talking around it and all that stuff. And so the guy who wrote it, who's in the film, James Adele, he eventually came to me and said, I'd like for you to direct it. I would be interested in having you do that. And I was really honored. I had finished a film called Trace, and I was working on a couple of their projects. And I said, yeah, I'd love to do that. And so that's what, those, and also just working with James, working with a close friend who has very similar ideas and attitudes about storytelling, but at the same time is just different enough that we kind of can complement each other. He's the easiest collaborator I've ever worked with, easily, no question about that. And so, if I wanted to go a little weird with a scene or, extend something out because I just thought it would be more authentic to those characters, he was always for that, which, that could be a battle occasionally when the guy who's in the film is also the writer. But his sensibilities and my sensibilities dovetailed nicely with each other. So that's really how the project came about.
Well, that's great that you were able to find someone that you could collaborate with, and it's going to work when it doesn't feel like work. It just naturally kind of happens. So, no, that's
Yeah.
fantastic.
Yeah, I feel incredibly blessed. We're actually he's going to be in a film that I'm directing at the end of the year, and then we're working on some other things together. So yeah, I see this as sort of a lifelong collaboration.
So, how was your experience actually making the film? Because I did have the pleasure of watching it earlier today. I love that the story is really centered around just three characters, and even though it's a feature, most of it takes place in one location, which I find very interesting. So, how was your experience in making the film?
Well, it was a really good experience, because there was a limited amount of space we were going to shoot in. Even though the location itself was relatively big, and I think we squeezed out a lot of different angles, and I think we had a kitchen set, we got a living room set, the bedroom set, whatever. Uh, you know, it did feel bigger than it actually was in that sense. And because I was limited to where we were going to be shooting, it actually allowed me to imagine uh, a lot more than I would. I think when you have too much space to work with, you can always be second and third guessing yourself. When I did Trace, we had a lot of sets, an enormous number of sets, and every single day I would go, "Oh gosh, you know what? We should have shot this way, or we should have shot that way." Whereas with this film, we just we could sit there and go, let's try 5 different ways in this room, see how they work best. Some scenes to me, right on the page, I felt like there's only one really good way to shoot this because this is about this character's internal motivation. It's not like, we're trying to get everyone's reaction. This is his, well, you saw the film. So when Gavin has his kind of big breakdown late in the second act, that to me, that entire sequence was already storyboarded in my head. I knew that we were going to be in on him. I knew the way he was going to be talking had to be, for me, him saying something to himself. Even though it was written to the other characters, I thought it would be much more authentic and less theatrical if he was just sort of muttering these things to himself. But we could hear them very clearly because we were so pushed in intimately on his face and his headspace. Eventually, even going so far as to sort of cutting into some very quick flashes of ideas or memories he was having. And I really, so stuff like that to me, as intimate as it is, it actually plays big and cinematic, I think in the right way. So yeah, and again, you have to have people. You've got to have a great crew that's down for that sort of thing. And knows that you're not just throwing up ideas and saying, well, let's just film it 10 different ways for just for the fun of it. There has to be a reason behind it. You have to be able to like stand behind a choice you're making. And, I don't think, I could have asked for a better crew in that respect. So, yeah, I'm trying to think if we had any real, there were a few funny moments. Like there were some shots where we were using a bathroom, which is actually a real bathroom, not a movie set bathroom. And the only way we could get certain shots was actually to almost create like a strange makeshift double tripod, and then get the video feed out to the video village, and so there could be no pull focus. We had to like lock the camera and say this is your space to work in, and we can't get anyone behind the camera. So it was crazy shots like that. But that, and again, you're looking at it going, I like that though. I think that's really interesting, and it's a little unexpected, but it actually fits the tone of the story. There's some shots you want that I wanted, I should say, that looked a little more dispassionate, um, where you're seeing someone, who's had a potential overdose, and someone taking care of them. And I think the natural inclination for a shot like that would be to push in and really sell the drama and sell the heartache of that moment. And I thought, well, I'd rather reverse that. I'd rather have almost a God's eye view of that, because there is there's a tendency to editorialize those moments and say, well, see, isn't this sad? Isn't this, isn't this sad? I'd rather that be almost like a Rorschach test for people and say, well, how do you feel about this moment? Do you pity this person? Do you stand in judgment of this person? Do you sympathize with them? But not, not try to lean in and say, well, this is how I feel by, cueing the music and pushing tightly in on their face. So it depended upon the moment. But I never felt like we ever went overboard in terms of, crazy camera angles or trying to oversell something stylistically. I think the style was dictated by the way the story played out in the script.
It's interesting you say that because I know exactly what shot you're talking about, where you said you have that almost like a God's eye view of what's going
Right.
on. And I thought the same thing. Like I was expecting it to go in tighter, but I like that different perspective though, because then you in a way you don't know quite what to expect, and you're not just doing the formula for the sake of doing the formula. So no, I see your point in that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It was something I talked to them about because, obviously I did the inverse too, where we go really tight on certain conversations. And those moments tended to be, for people that watch the film a second time or whatever, they'll start picking up on probably what I was doing there, where you've got like the character of, the three characters. You've got Gavin, you've got Shane, and you've got Marty. Marty being kind of the warm center of those three friends. And Marty is not necessarily the most articulate guy with what he's trying to say, but I like getting close to him. I like getting close to his face because you can understand a lot more about him in not what he's saying, but what he's trying to say. And then you've got the character of Shane, who's very pulled together. And what I liked doing with him was getting him looking, big and imposing and slick, and then occasionally just pulling back a little bit and watching him sort of flounder, looking for a way to recompose himself. And the actor Drew Kinney is so good, and he knew precisely how to play that. There's some moments where he seems so composed, and then he knows how to kind of just suddenly drop the mask and not know what to say. And of course, Gavin, because it's primarily Gavin's story, I was always trying to like go against the grain. When he would have these really bad moments, pull away. When he was a little bit more, guarded, then you sort of push in. Whereas, so we're kind of trying to figure him out.
And that's the interesting thing that I enjoyed the most about the movie is that dynamic between the three characters. And I almost sound like a broken record when I say this because I've said it so many times on this show, but at the core of a film, it's about the characters and the
Yes.
story that they tell. And I thought that the fact that it was centered around these three characters, they're pretty much together the entire time. And I'm going to try really hard not to spoil, big revelations that happen, but something that I loved about their dynamic is that you could tell there was this almost like an awkward tension from the very beginning, and then you would feel the tension rise a bit, but then it would go back down and things would seem fine. Then it would go back up a little bit higher, but then it would be brought back down. And then there's we'll say that the three characters have a visitor, and when she storms out is when things really hit the fan. And just the scenes with Gavin in the bathroom, and he's trying really hard to hold it together, and you're like, oh, this is it. This is where it's going to hit the fan, and then it kind of comes down a little bit, and then it hits the fan.
Yeah.
I enjoyed that kind of emotional push and pull. It was almost like a tease to a bigger thing, and then you get pulled back into, okay, well then things are fine now, and you just get pushed a little bit more, and until the climax of the movie happens.
Well, one of my I appreciate you saying that. One of my favorite scenes in the film is right at the end, where the three are back together. And I won't, to say any more is to kind of give, not that like there's any massive revelation in the story, but there is a sort of a somewhat of a resolution. And I always said, if we didn't nail that moment, then this whole journey is for naught. And I am so happy that I believe we really did nail that. Some friends of mine were tough guys who like, yeah, the film was okay, but man, that last scene made me cry, and I watched the film again because of that, because it made me happy. I realized, okay, there is a way to kind of come together in the most simple way possible. And I guess it goes back to that initial question you asked me, Derek, which was, what drew me to the story. And again, part of it was the fact that a good friend wrote it, and I understood it, and I felt like I was the right guy to direct it. But we're in such a divisive period of our lives, country-wise, both from a political standpoint, obviously, and also the fact that we have to social distance, which I think is almost the worst possible situation, because right now I think we need more of a communal attitude. We need to be coming together, and social media, I think, has a great ring to it, but it's really not social media. It's declaration media, where everyone sort of stakes their place in a political ideology or a social ideology, whatever. And it's it's too bad, and I hope we can get beyond that. But just the simple act of people communing with each other and saying, "Hey, I just like the fact you're alive on the planet. I just happen to like the fact that you and I have a shared history of doing goofy shit together." I love that. To me, that makes me feel like, well, then that journey is worth it. But we have to see it, right? And that's the other reason I felt like the script nailed a really great point, which is, yeah, we could have this soliloquy at the end where, well, what did you discover? What's the big revelation? But that's not really the point. It never is the point. It's like, do you love me? Do I love you? Are we friends? Are we, at the end of the day, do we have more in common than not? And that was critically important for me, and it's important for me in my life today as we speak. I think we need to be purveyors of hope, and the creative world it has the opportunity to do that, and that doesn't mean that everything is going to be sunshine and roses, but it means that we can create commonality, and I think that level of commonality does create a certain level of hope, because if we know we're in this together, that we're not just alone on this planet, and more people today feel more alone than they ever have with social media. What does that tell you? So I think that stories that celebrate real friendship, and also celebrate the fact that people can say, look, man, we were friends until Facebook came around, and we were friends until you decided that you could ghost me. It's like we need to also, I think, in the best way, remind people that that's not okay, and that's not how friendships and that's not how communities are built. And so, that's hopefully, I don't even know if that's the question, but that's the answer.
No, I couldn't agree with you more, and it's it was relatable to me in the sense that I've been there. I've been there to where I've had huge disagreements with friends, and it seemed like we weren't going to be friends anymore. And then it was kind of, things are going to be okay. You can have disagreements and still be okay. You can still work things out. And to your point, yeah, it's great to chat with people on social media, whether it be Twitter, Facebook, whatever the case may be. But it doesn't replace the true interaction that we have with friends when it's us hanging out in person or going out and doing things, or even sitting at home and playing video games or something
Right.
like that. And the combination of having to social distance due to COVID, you have the political divisiveness, you have all the social injustice that's going on. It's just a very, very uncertain and at times uncomfortable time. But
Absolutely.
to me, that little message there at the end, it spoke to me in the sense that, for one, I could relate to it, but it was like, you know what? We can all disagree on some things, but it's okay.
Exactly. We can disagree on a lot of things, you know, but if we can find a common ground, a common ground of reality, substantive, quantifiable reality that we can all stand together on, then we've got something to work with, right? I mean, because we're living in a culture now where people can seemingly question the nature of matter. Is
Yeah.
water wet? It's like we can't build on anything like that. And I feel that is, uh, maybe goes back to something we were talking about, I think even before the interview, which was just a sort of critical class that's sprung up where everybody feels that they have to, exert this or, declare the, how bad this is or how good this is. And if you fall somewhere in the gray area, then you get marginalized or you get dismissed. And that's very dangerous. And that is not the way forward. Absolutely not the way forward.
I totally agree. I could not have said it
Yeah.
any better myself. And I know as we start to wrap things up here, you had mentioned it briefly a couple of minutes ago, but you said that you're going to be directing another film, hopefully at the end of the year.
Yeah, a movie called The Hourglass, which is a sort of a Twilight Zone-y film, and that I'm doing that, and then I'm finishing the script for Trace the Origin, which is the sequel to Trace, but it's actually kind of a prequel. It's an interesting kind of like metaphysical prequel,
Hmm.
and yeah, so I'm doing those things. So yeah, I'm busy. I'm busy with I'm just definitely busy with projects.
Fantastic. In
Yeah.
closing, what is one piece of advice that you would have for an aspiring filmmaker?
One piece of advice. Well, uh, first and foremost, I would say if you if you really want to do it, if you say film is the thing that is going to be my way to not just express myself, but express myself in the best possible way. In other words, if it's not going to be writing, if it's not going to be sculpture or dance or whatever it is, because all those are great things too. But if it's truly going to be film, start with the story. Everybody has an idea. That's great, and you've probably heard this a million times yourself. I've got a great idea for a movie. It's like, yeah, that's not a story. you know, what's the story? And if you've got a story, the story will guide you. The story will get you what you need. If you say, well, the story is about this, this, and this, and you can put it down, you can actually write it down, and you can see the arc of that story, and you use that as the fuel, as the roadmap to making a movie. It will not matter if the film is shot blurry. It won't matter if the sound is perfect. It will stand. And that's the most important part. The problem I think so many people get into, I know I know a lot of people have, is, when they start into film, they go, I have an idea for a story. I'll go get a camera. I'll go get this. I'll go get that. And they end up with all this equipment and going, gosh, I got to put this stuff on eBay to pay rent next month. It's really important to say, do I have stories to tell? Or do I have someone who has great stories to tell and I have a filmic vision? That's the important thing. And then guess what? You're in luck because right now, if you're listening to this on an iPhone or whatever, you've got a camera. So now you're off to the races. So it's totally possible. There is enormous opportunity for every single person listening to this that if they want to get into making movies, this is the best time to do it. If you're wondering, well, it's COVID and it's, climate change and it's political horror and all these different things, all those things are true. But what's equally true is that you have an opportunity to change that through creative storytelling. You can make a difference. And this is the best time to do that. So there is real hope there.
Do you have any website or social media that you'd like to plug so the listeners can follow you?
Well, thanks, man. Yeah, if you want to follow me on an Instagram, it's all one word. It's RyansCornerz, Ryan's Corners. That's Instagram, and just my name, Ryan Brookhart, on Facebook. There will be eventually a website going back up with my artwork, but it's down because there's so many other things that we're adding to it. So right now that's not up. But yeah, Instagram and Facebook would be the way to find me right now.
Awesome.
And I will respond as long as you say something constructive. It doesn't have to be nice, but as long as it's constructive, I'll respond.
That's fantastic to know. Well, Ryan, thank you so much for taking the time to do this interview. It was fantastic.
Hey, it was really nice talking to you, Derek, and I'm now a subscriber, so I'm looking forward to listening to our conversation.
Well, you won't have to wait too long to hear it. So again, I appreciate the time and I appreciate the subscription. But if you want to follow me on social media, I'm on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, all at D Diamond Podcast. If you want to subscribe to the show, I'm on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, really anywhere you can get podcasts. Just search for The Derek Diamond Experience. And of course, thank you to the Unicorn Wranglers for providing the theme music for the podcast. You can find all their music on Apple Music, Google Play, and Spotify. That's going to do it for this week's show. Thank you once again for listening. Enjoy the rest of your week. Have a safe and fun weekend, and we'll see you guys back here next Thursday.